Today we're diving deep into a conflict that is often called the Soviet Union's Vietnam, a grueling, decade-long war that not only changed the face of Afghanistan, but also played a pivotal role in the downfall of a superpower. This is the story of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. To understand why the Soviet Union rolled its tanks into Afghanistan on Christmas Eve of 1979, we need to rewind a bit. For centuries, Afghanistan, nestled at the crossroads of Central and South Asia, has been a critical geopolitical chessboard. In the 19th century, it was the epicenter of the great game between the British and Russian empires. Fast forward to the Cold War, and that strategic importance hadn't faded one bit. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a global struggle for influence, and Afghanistan, sharing a long border with the Soviet Union, was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Throughout the mid-20th century, Afghanistan was a monarchy, skillfully balancing its relationships with both East and West. It received aid from both the US and the USSR, managing to maintain a delicate neutrality. But in 1973, that stability was shattered. Mohammed Daoud Khan, the king's cousin, overthrew the monarchy in a coup and established a republic. Daoud Khan initially leaned towards the Soviet Union, but he grew wary of their influence and started seeking closer ties with the West and other non-aligned nations. This shift made Moscow very nervous. Inside Afghanistan, political tensions were simmering. The People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, or PDPA, was a communist party with strong ties to Moscow. The PDPA itself was deeply divided into two main factions: the Khalq, which was more radical and Pashtun-dominated, and the Parcham, which was more moderate and urban. In April 1978, these factions temporarily united to stage a bloody coup known as the Sour Revolution. They overthrew and killed President Daoud Khan, establishing the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. The new communist government, led by Nur Muhammad Taraki of the Khalq faction, immediately embarked on a radical modernization program. They pushed for land reform, secular education, and women's rights, including banning forced marriages. While these reforms might sound progressive on paper, they were imposed with brutal force, completely disregarding Afghanistan's deeply traditional, religious, and tribal society. The government's militant atheism and its violent suppression of dissent, particularly in the countryside, ignited widespread rebellion. Groups of religiously motivated fighters, who would become known as the Mujahideen or Holy Warriors, began to rise up against the government in Kabul. The situation inside the PDPA was just as chaotic. The infighting between the Khalq and Parcham factions was vicious. The real power struggle was between two Khalq leaders, President Taraki and his ambitious Prime Minister, Hafizullah Amin. Amin was ruthless and increasingly powerful. In September 1979, this rivalry came to a head. Amin orchestrated the removal and subsequent death of Taraki, seizing total control of the country. This was the final straw for the Soviet leadership in Moscow. They had never trusted Amin. They saw him as dangerously unpredictable, fanatical, and suspected he might even be secretly communicating with the CIA, potentially flipping Afghanistan into the American camp. The prospect of losing their communist buffer state and having a hostile, possibly US-aligned government on their southern border was a nightmare scenario for the Kremlin. The Brezhnev Doctrine, which asserted the Soviet Union's right to intervene in other socialist countries, provided the justification. The decision was made. On December 24, 1979, the invasion began. Soviet transport planes started landing at Kabul airport, disgorging elite troops and equipment. On December 27th, Soviet Spetsnaz special forces stormed the Tajbek Palace, killing Hafizullah Amin and his family. They installed Babrak Karmal, a leader from the more manageable Parcham faction, as the new president. Simultaneously, Soviet mechanized divisions poured across the border, quickly occupying major cities and strategic highways. Moscow publicly claimed they were answering a request from the Afghan government to help stabilize the country against counter-revolutionary elements, backed by foreign powers. They expected a quick surgical operation, secure the cities, prop up the Karmal government, and withdraw in a matter of months. They could not have been more wrong. The Soviet presence had the opposite effect. Instead of quelling the rebellion, it supercharged it. The invasion transformed a scattered internal uprising into a full-blown national war of resistance, a jihad against a foreign, atheist invader. The Afghan people from all walks of life united against the Soviets. The Mujahideen, once a collection of local militias, now had a powerful, unifying cause. The landscape of Afghanistan itself became a weapon. The rugged, mountainous terrain was perfect for guerrilla warfare. The Mujahideen knew every cave, valley, and mountain pass. They could strike Soviet columns and garrisons and then melt back into the landscape, where the local population provided them with food, shelter, and intelligence. The Soviets, with their tanks and helicopters, were powerful in the open, but vulnerable to ambushes in the narrow passes and valleys. Their heavy equipment was difficult to maintain and often unsuited for the harsh conditions. The war's international dimension exploded. The United States, still reeling from its defeat in Vietnam and seeing a chance to bleed its Cold War rival, launched Operation Cyclone. This was one of the largest and most expensive covert operations in CIA history, working primarily through Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI. The U.S. funneled billions of dollars in weapons and financial aid to the Mujahideen. This support wasn't just from the U.S. Saudi Arabia matched the American funding, and weapons and volunteers poured in from across the Muslim world. Pakistan became the primary staging ground for the resistance, hosting millions of Afghan refugees and serving as a training and supply hub for the Mujahideen. A crucial turning point in the war came in 1986. The United States began supplying the Mujahideen with FIM-92 Stinger missiles. These shoulder-fired, heat-seeking missiles were a game-changer. Suddenly, the Soviets' biggest advantage, their air power, particularly the dreaded Mi-24 Hind helicopter gunships, was neutralized. Mujahideen fighters could now shoot down Soviet aircraft from a safe distance. The skies were no longer safe for the Red Army, and their losses mounted dramatically. The war became a brutal, grinding stalemate. The Soviets controlled the cities and major roads during the day, but the countryside, which was most of Afghanistan, belonged to the Mujahideen at night. The conflict was marked by extreme brutality on all sides. Soviet forces and the Afghan government army carried out indiscriminate bombing campaigns, destroying entire villages suspected of harboring Mujahideen. They laid millions of landmines, which continue to claim victims to this day. In return, the Mujahideen were often ruthless with captured soldiers and government officials. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union was in serious trouble. Its economy was stagnating, and the war in Afghanistan was draining its resources and manpower. Morale within the army plummeted. The war was deeply unpopular back home, as the bodies of young conscripts returned in what became known as Cargo 200 zinc coffins. When Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in 1985, with his new policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, he knew the bleeding wound of Afghanistan had to be closed. In 1988, the Geneva Accords were signed. This agreement, brokered by the United Nations and guaranteed by the US and USSR, laid out a timetable for a complete Soviet withdrawal. On February 15, 1989, the last Soviet soldier, General Boris Gromov, walked across the Friendship Bridge from Afghanistan into the Soviet territory of Uzbekistan. The 10-year-long war was finally over for the Soviets, but for Afghanistan, the tragedy was far from over. The war had been devastating. An estimated 1 million Afghan civilians were killed. Another 5 to 6 million became refugees fleeing to Pakistan and Iran. The country's infrastructure was destroyed. The Soviet-backed government of Najibullah managed to hang on for 3 more years, but without its patrons' support, it was doomed. In 1992, Kabul fell to the Mujahideen. The victory, however, was hollow. The various Mujahideen factions, once united against the Soviets, immediately turned their guns on each other. The country descended into a devastating civil war, arguably even more destructive than the war against the Soviets. The legacy of the Soviet-Afghan War is immense and complex. For the Soviet Union, The defeat was a catastrophic blow to its military prestige and a significant factor in the collapse of public morale and confidence, accelerating its dissolution in 1991. For Afghanistan, it was the start of a cycle of violence that continues, in many ways, to this day. The conflict also created a global network of trained, battle-hardened Islamist fighters, including a wealthy Saudi volunteer named Osama bin Laden, who would later apply the guerrilla tactics learned in Afghanistan to a global stage. The war that began on Christmas Eve in 1979 cast a long, dark shadow that shaped the course of the 21st century. If you found this video informative, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history.